everybody, Steve in the Pinball Room. Welcome to a new location. This used to be our game room and now our front room, and now it's my home office. And we're not by the pinball machine today. Today we're just on the laptop. And so we're sitting here in my comfy chair, and we're going to talk about adding keyboard controls through Mission Pinball Framework, or MPF, to your code, to your machine, so that you can try testing out your machine even when you're not in the same room with your pinball machine. Totally different. All right, what are the use cases? Why would you want to do this? All right, and what is keyboard controls? So in a nutshell, keyboard controls is a super cool feature that Mission Pinball Framework has. It allows you to go through and add a section into your config file, and we'll talk you through how to do all this, that allows you to map keys on your keyboard to switches and actions within your game code that will then simulate those things happening. Why would you want to do that versus just being there at your pinball machine and pushing the buttons and hitting the switches yourself? Well, a couple of reasons that I've been told, and one main one that I'm going to be leveraging it for myself right now. But a couple of reasons. First primary one perhaps is there's lots of times where maybe you just want to work on your pinball machine and you don't want to be out in your garage or in your workroom or wherever it is. You'd rather be working somewhere else. Maybe you're out of town and you're like, you know what? I got time to kill. I'm going to work on my pinball machine code. I don't know. Any reason why you might want to be away from your pinball machine, this is going to be helpful. Now, a couple of specific reasons. If you're going through and testing game code, having keyboard controls allows you to much more quickly get to the right situation or instance or mode within your game code to then test things. Let's say I'm working in my game code and I have this new wizard mode I'm putting together. Well, there are steps to qualify to even start that wizard mode, right? I have to complete this other mode. I have to maybe complete a bunch of modes, and you can sit there with your physical pinball machine and go through and hit all the right switches over and over to complete all the modes and get through it all, and then finally unlock that mode. But that can be very tedious and time consuming depending on your physical layout. It might be kind of complicated. Or with keyboard controls, you can go through and set up like a combination of keys that will go through and say, I'm going to hit this key here, Shift M, and that's going to automatically go through and get me to a certain mode. It's going to start a mode. It's going to start this wizard mode. So I can do it just with a simple keyboard shortcut as opposed to having to hit all the physical shots on my physical pinball machine. All right, even if you're standing next to it, that can still be super helpful, right? Save you a lot of time, be able to get right in, try the shot, tweak it. Nope, that wasn't right. Okay, make some changes, go back into it again. I think you can see how if you're iterating on the software portion, it can be a lifesaver and saving you tons of time. Another thing, I talked about it all being remote. So let's say, let's take a hypothetical. Let's have a hypothetical. Let's say suppose you're working on a pinball machine and you've got this really cool staircase mech with a stepper motor, but you're having another person who's smarter than you. Maybe his name's Anthony Van Winkle, and you're going to have him go through. He's volunteered to help create some custom code to make those stepper motors work the way you need them to. And he's not near you. He lives all the way across the country, and so he's nowhere near your physical pinball machine. But he needs a copy of your code, and he needs a way to kind of test out the custom code he's adding to your default code to see if it even works before he sends it to you. And well, he can't fly in and be physically next to your machine, and so if you could use a thing like GitHub or some other code repository online where you could upload your code, and then he can download on his system and play through it virtually and hit keys, simulate the buttons on your pinball machine or the switches on your pinball machine, and that could trigger the stepper motor. So I think you see where I'm going with this, right? Anyway, so if you're collaborating on game code remotely with other people, this is also a huge thing that allows them to work on a machine if they're not anywhere near it physically. So that's honestly, that's the reason why I'm using it right now, and I added support to it so I could share my code with Anthony and he can go through and create some custom code for me, which he's being very gracious to do. All right, anyway, there's a couple of reasons as to why you might do it and kind of the circumstances around it all. Let's go ahead and just jump into what it is. This shouldn't be a super long video unless I'm super wordy, as I sometimes am, because it's fairly straightforward, all right? A couple of tricks we're going to show along the way that I think will be helpful to you. A couple little gotchas you want to look out for, especially if you're on a Windows machine, all right? So we'll get to that. First and foremost, to be able to add keyboard control, you're simply going to be adding another set of declarations into your primary core config file, okay? It's that simple. By now, I think you've probably figured it out, right? That's just the name of the game. There's lots of different config files, right? Okay, so let's jump on in and let's take a look at our config file. So on my machine, again, if I go into where I have MPF and I have LZ as the project name or game machine name for my game code, in here, inside config, I have a config file. Now you also see I have a separate one called keyboard.yaml. Let's talk about that for a minute. Basically, what you need to do to be able to add keyboard support just like we have all these other sections inside our config file of hardware and playfield and displays and modes and sound systems and coils and flippers and switches and autofire and drop targets, just like we have all these other sections of declarations, right? We need to add a section that is simply called keyboard, okay? Now, you can see there's no keyboard listed in mine right now. Instead, what I've done is I've added a section called config. And then inside that, I've defined another file called keyboard.yaml. So what this is the ability, which I think is super cool because I'm kind of OCD and anal retentive and super organized and like to keep things clean. This is the ability to go through and nest config files and reference config files from within your main config file. You can reference out a sub-config file, let's call it that, a sub-config file. Now, why would you want to do this? Why not just put it all inside this file, Steve? Well, we are just barely starting to put game code into my system, right? And if you look in here, my core config file already has 624 lines of code. Not trivial, not a lot, but it's kind of a lot. Well, I'm just barely starting. I've got no modes or anything set up hardly at all. And so you can see how this would like expand exponentially. It's gonna get huge. In the other video, we talked a little bit about game modes and you have to have a different folder and a different config file per game mode. Well, this is really basically the same thing. We added in a section here, remember, called modes. And then we put down here a hyphen, a space, and then the name of the mode. That tells Mission Pinball Framework, oh, go look for this folder called base, called a trap, called skill shot. And inside that folder, you should then see a config file named base, skill shot, etc. .yaml. And then that's where we're gonna see all the config stuff for that specific mode. So we can have different modes together. Well, your keyboard declarations and your keyboard controls, your light shows, all your setup for like your sound files and for your call outs, for lots of different things. They can be by themselves several hundred lines of code. So instead of having all those jam-packed into a single file, we break them out, right? Makes sense. Okay, I love it. I think it's fabulous. That we don't have to worry about scrolling down through several thousand lines of code to find that section. I can just like, oh, I need to mess with my keyboard controls. Let me just open up my keyboard file, okay? So just like modes, we do the same type of thing. We're gonna add a section called config, okay? We're gonna put a hyphen and then a space and then the name of that config, that sub-config file, all right? Keyboard.yaml. Now, I don't know exactly how you can work with system paths, and as you can have these sub-configs in different subfolders. The way I've learned it, the way I'm doing it, is I'm just putting this config file, if you remember, inside my core config folder right next to my other config file, okay? So I could have, you know, a dozen other sub-config files right in here next to my main core config file, all right? So that's how I'm doing it. So I've only got the one right now set up, keyboard. I plan on doing one for my lighting, one on doing things for my callouts, like for my light shows. Like there's gonna be several here I think I'll be using. I've been looking at other people in the community and how they've done it, and many of them have, you know, 8 to 15 sub-config files just to keep everything nice and clean. So I highly encourage you to do this, but you don't have to. If you don't want to, or if you do, let's look at the keyboard config file. All right, so this file contains everything that we would put inside our primary config file if we didn't want to separate it out. Okay, and that is, we're putting another little declaration here of keyboard with the semicolon. And then we put in, we tab in the 4 spaces. And what are we defining? We're defining a key, the keystroke of number 1, keystroke of shift+1, an apostrophe, the letter Z, JK. I've only got like 4 or 5 defined, right? But you define the actual key, another semicolon, you do another return, another tab over, and then what is that key bound to? We're gonna bind this to a switch. All right, so you say switch colon, and then you define the actual switch name from your code. All right, mine is S_trough_1. That means every time I hit the number 1 button, it's going to simulate the first trough switch being hit, like a ball's hitting it, right? Okay, and I can do that with a Z to simulate my left flipper. The question mark is my right flipper. I'm actually going to change it, I think, to an X, so that the Z and the X are right next to each other instead of across the keyboard. And then I've got J just randomly for the left center stand up and K for the right center stand up, because right now I've got my stepper motor being triggered off the left stand up to go up 1 step for testing, and then the right stand up, it's going to go up a full flight of stairs for testing, so I can test those 2 rotations. Okay, so that's all I have defined right now, all right? Just simple keys. So something else you're probably looking at here though, what's this whole toggle thing, Steve? So there's the ability and there's certain circumstances where you might want to toggle a switch to stay in the on switch, right? Keys, right, and switches are momentary, right? Or they go on and off. You can hit it, it becomes active. Once you let go, it becomes inactive, right? If you're pushing a stand-up target, it's active. As soon as you let go, it becomes inactive again, right? On and off. Well, certain switches, particularly ones that are like holding the ball, so like the trough switches, switches for a ball lock, maybe like your VUC or things like that, where it's going to be holding the ball, it's going to be staying active. You want to be able to toggle that switch on. And so for that, you can, again, just put in a keystroke and define what it is. Mine, again, is a switch. So I added one here called Shift +1. So if I hit Shift 1, instead of just hitting it momentarily, this is going to toggle, and I set that to true. Every time I hit it, it's going to be a toggle. It's going to toggle it on and off, right? I'll need to keep track in my head which state it's in, right? Actually, there's a little bit monitor in the command line that'll show you where it's at. But yeah, that's how you can toggle some things on and off. So I want to simulate there's a ball in that first slot in the trough. I will hit Shift 1, that'll toggle that switch on. Then MPF will think there's a ball there. I can hit the start button, I can start my game. I can then toggle it off later if I want. Okay, so that's another thing. You can do the momentary switches and then you can do a toggle. Okay, so that's really it as far as the config file. Super simple. Okay, now let's go through and try it out. That's where we're going to get into a couple of the small little gotchas, little hints that I've learned from everybody else that you want to pay attention to. So let's go back down here to your screen. I'm going to open my command line here, my command terminal, and you'll see I'm in scon mpf-lz. So you're in your machine folder, right? And just like any other time when you want to start MPF, I'm going to go through and hit MPF both, so my media controller and the game starts. But since I want to start it virtually, if you follow the tutorial, you already know this, but if you haven't, you're going to learn it now. If you just do MPF both, that's going to require you to be connected to your physical machine for it to work. It's going to be trying to sense those fast circuit boards, the I/O boards, and everything. If you're not connected physically, you're going to do a different like command line option or operator. You're going to do dash or -X, and that's going to mean like virtual. Okay. So also we're going to do one called -T. That's going to turn off the normal text UI that we see with like the little green lines. If you remember from my other video, that shows you when a switch is being hit. We're going to turn that off. If you're doing like your machine in final production mode, right? You want to play it like in the actual machine. You want to have that -T. You want to turn off those text controls, or else you have an extra screen trying to be displayed on like your DMD or your backboard display that has all these like logs and errors. It's great for development. We want to see that during development. We want to see when switches are being fired and what's working. But when you're actually just finally playing the game, you want all that hidden. So the -T will hide that UI. And I'm just going to keep it out of the way for right now. Now, if you're like me, if you read through the tutorial or you're listening to this video and you're saying, oh, how'd you know it was -X? How'd you know it was -T? Are there other ones? Well, guess what? There are. There's a bunch more. I dug through the documentation, and maybe you'll find it way more easier than I did. It's there. It's super simple, but I wasn't sure where to click on and where to find it. So let me show you my browser. All right. So here we are at the Mission Framework docs, right? Over here on the left-hand side, you'll see installation first steps. You see the user manual. You'll see the tutorial, which I highly recommend you go through. My videos, I'm doing my best to kind of cover everything for you and show you where I've kind of found gaps in documentation and things like that. But I don't pretend to say that all my videos are covering everything exhaustively, okay? There's a lot in these docs that I'm not gonna be able to cover. And frankly, I don't want to. There's a lot in here that goes beyond what I'm doing. So if you're doing your own and you wanna go through and learn it, I highly recommend go through, read the tutorial, follow the steps. They've done a really good job. Combine that with my videos, maybe to cover some of the areas that were a little bit unclear. That's what I've been trying to do, but read the docs. Okay, if we click on the section that says running MPF, we get into a page here that talks about how to start up MPF. As we've talked about this, right? You go to the command line, you navigate to your machine folder, you type in MPF both, and that'll start up the media controller and the core MPF software, right? You can also just do MPF MC and just do the media controller if you just want to play with like your attract and your slideshows and things like that. But then there's these other command line options, and so I didn't know where those were. If you go inside MPF commands, all right, that makes sense. Type on that, or you click on that. Now we get MPF commands. MPF both, that's what I've been using, right? You'll go through and click on MPF both, like I did, and you'll read great content that'll explain to you about what this command is. But that's not where all those different options of -V and -X and everything else is. Like even here, they give an example. MPF both /V with a capital V or a lowercase b. What do those mean? I don't know. When do I use them? Here's an example. -L is going to specify a log file. All right. Anyway, to find all these command options, understand what they are, we're going to go over here on the left-hand side, and there's an option for MPF game. Okay, that's just kind of like the core one that tells you all the different like commands you can do with the game. I might have labeled it differently. Maybe we'll submit a request to get that part cleared up in the docs a little bit. But right now, this is where you go through and find. And here it says MPF game command line utility. Here's all the command line options. -A lowercase, -A uppercase. What does this do? It has to do with caching your config files. That could be helpful. Maybe you want to kind of clear out the cache to make sure it's using all your fresh config files just in case, right? That's an option. There's lots of these. You can read through all of them. I'm not going to talk about them all, but this is where you find them, okay? Hopefully that's helpful. A lot of fun options that might be helpful to you when you're trying to debug your game and do specific things, okay? -X lowercase says this ignores all the platform settings in your config files, meaning you are using fast hardware or PROC or whatever else, right? And instead it forces it to run using the virtual platform. This is nice for testing when you don't have physical hardware attached. Okay, there we go, just like what we're doing. So all that was a little diatribe to say, we're gonna go to our command line, we're gonna type in MPF both, and we're gonna add a -X, and I'm gonna add the -T to also hide that one interface, all right? And we go through and run all that. All right, and here we go, we're starting up. We've got the media control over here on the right. So this is my display window, what would show on my actual pinball machine. All right, and when you see my little track sequence going, right? Led Zeppelin Pinball, press start. Okay, it's on free play. Over here on the left is the command line. You'll notice, it might be hard for you to see, probably you see like some text kind of jittering. It's still kind of updating with new information. It's keeping track from the event manager of, oh, this slide just went by. Now a new slide's active. Okay, that's where we're going to be able to see as we type a key, as we press a key, that's where we're going to see, oh, this key was active and then inactive, right? So let me go ahead and try it. We're going to press the number 1 key. Look at that. Switch, trough 1, active, inactive. And then it got buried by some other messages, right? But it was there, okay? So we know that was working, all right? Now, if you push a key and you don't see anything happen, the game doesn't start, you don't notice a little comment down there about active, inactive with all those little carrots, okay? There's 2 primary reasons why you might be having an issue. They're both pretty simple. If you're on a Windows machine, make sure you don't have the num lock or number lock key active. If your number lock is turned on, this isn't going to work. I don't pretend to understand why, but it simply will not work. So make sure number lock is off, okay? The other reason it might not work, it all has to do about focus of the windows in your operating system, right? And so what the window that needs to have focus is not actually the command line where you might think, because that's where you're going to be watching for things, right? But it's actually the Python window, or the window that's showing your track mode and the actual display of your game. That's the window that needs to be active, that is watching for the keyboard presses, right? So if you tab away and like you've got, your docs open and you're running through MPF docs as well, and then you push a button, even if you can still see this one, right, on the screen, but it's not active. So if that's like, it's there, but the command line window slightly on top, you start pushing keys. Now I push the key, nothing happens. Okay, so just make sure that this window that has your slideshow going through everything else, make sure that media controller window, make sure that window is active, and then you can do your key presses. So I'm going to do Shift 1. Okay, now it's toggled where I have a ball in there. I can hit the apostrophe button, and my game starts. Now player 1, ball 1, 0, 0. Okay, and now I can hit my Z button for the left flipper, right button, or X button for the right flipper. Okay. And again, it's kind of getting buried by other things. It's talking about this timer for my skill shot and things like that, but it's working. That's how you do it, okay? Super straightforward. That's all there is. We can hit escape and Control C. We can exit out of the game. You might have a few extra keystrokes in your command line afterwards that were like buffered, no big deal, okay? But there you go. That's keyboard controls in and of itself. It's pretty simple, right? Pretty straightforward. Hopefully that makes sense. There's really not much to it. You add in a few lines into your config file, and there you go. I encourage you to try listing out or referencing sub-config files to keep things really clean and organized. But that's it, okay? And that way you can go through and simulate all the switches, and you start seeing points rack up. You can go through the modes. Super helpful for game testing. I'm still super early in my code at this point, so I don't even have like modes to jump right to show you how to do that. But I mean, it's fairly straightforward. So there you go, guys. Hopefully that makes sense. Nice, short and sweet, quick video today, at least shorter. I want to give a huge shout out to everyone who's been following along and has been supporting us, supporting me in this project, and just being part of the conversation. Like I really appreciate it. The live stream that went through the other day, thank you so much everybody that showed up. We had like 20 people there, I think at our max, in 17, 18, and a lot of really good discussion. If you couldn't made it, don't worry. I'll try to do another one sometime soon. I think I got most of the technical hiccups figured out. So yeah, stay tuned for more live streams coming as well on other topics. And yeah, other than that, hope you have a great day. Have fun playing pinball. If you haven't started your own pinball machine, why not? Start on it. Okay, now I don't want to put any pressure on anybody. You definitely don't need to be starting your own pinball machine. Maybe you'll never do it and you just want to follow along because this is still just interesting to watch and you're learning a lot anyway. Great, thank you. I totally still appreciate it. It's good. But if you've ever considered it, if you're ever thinking maybe I would, but it seems daunting, it seems like too much, is it something you're going to build in a weekend? No, this is a long project. As you can see from my 1.5 years of videos now, there's a lot to it, but there's never been a better time. Like seriously, I take my hat off to all of you who've gone before. I mean, think about all the things they put in place for us now with the open source software, the circuitry, the IO boards. There's so much out there, the community of help, all the documentation. It makes it so easy for us. I think back to when I first got into pinball. I had my very first pinball machine, a high-speed to the getaway. Back in 2005, I got it. 15, 17 years ago at this point. Trying to build a pinball machine back then with what there was, or even before that, in the early 2000s, the late 90s, people were doing that. They're building their own custom pinball machines way before I've come along, or we've been doing it here. They had to do so much more work. I just cannot even imagine. There's no way I would have been able to do what I'm doing now if I wasn't standing on the shoulders of the giants who went beforehand. So seriously, thank you, everyone, all the unsung heroes. I don't even know your names. I don't even know who all has done this. I don't even know the history, but there's so much I can recognize now, the work and the effort that's gone into it. So thank you, everyone who's blazed the trail and who's made it to where homebrew pinball is so much easier. And it's only going to get easier. It's going to even get better and better. All right. I guess you could argue if I wait another 5 years, Steve, it'll be even easier. Well, okay, maybe. But then you're missing out on all that fun. So get on it today. All right. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate all your support and have a great time playing pinball. And we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.